Welcome to the Scientific Montessori Podcast, where we translate the latest academic research into Montessori-aligned practices and share insights to make parenting dramatically easier. This episode brings you the audio version of our article, Unraveling the History of Language. To explore more articles, visit scientificmontessori.com.
In the Montessori elementary curriculum, we first trace the history of the universe, then the history of Earth, the history of life, and the history of humanity, in that order, and then we trace the history of language.
Right. There's a flow where we present the big picture first, then move toward the details.
Why do we learn this way during the age 6 to 12 period?
Because it's more efficient for learning. In conventional education, it's the opposite. There's an arrow going from familiar things to the world and with effort toward the universe. That's inefficient.
When you learn about your local area, then Morioka City, Iwate Prefecture, Tohoku, Japan, Asia, the world, people overseas feel like very distant beings. But in the opposite direction, universe, galaxy, solar system, Earth, people of the world feel very close.
Right. In the universe, if you live within 1 parsec, you're like neighbors. 1 parsec is about 30.8 trillion kilometers, but in the universe, that's quite close.
Right. It's not just spatial distance. There's a similar sense with temporal distance, too. When you think about the history of life, the origin of language must have been just recently.
So even when we say global, within the universe, Earth is a local planet, and events that happen here are local events. Learning things without awareness helps maintain intellectual humility.
Because you realize you don't understand anything at all.
In Socratic terms, knowing that you don't know. In Buddhist terms, avidya, meaning ignorance.
Right.
Trying to understand even a little of that cosmic unknowability is cosmic inquiry, and the education and learning that happens everywhere daily is trivial in comparison.
What is language from a cosmic perspective?
There are various definitions of language, and first, it's difficult to determine what language is. Academically, there are more than 20 different definitions.
I see. I want to unravel the history of language, but what is language in that context?
The simplest definition is language as a medium of information exchange. Following this definition, facial expressions, gestures, attitudes, whistles, hand signals, writing, mathematical language, and programming languages, that is, computer languages, are all included in the concept of language. Ants' chemical language and honeybees' dance language are included too. So it refers to all forms of communication expression.
With that definition, we can also address non-human communication.
Following this definition, the numerous bioacoustic information exchanges made at frequencies inaudible to humans, that is, organisms producing sounds, also count as language. For example, the audible range of an average 15-year-old human is about 10 octaves, from 30 to 18,000 hertz. Birds, frogs, dogs, and others all produce sounds within this range. However, some organisms produce infrasound below 30 hertz. For example, blue whales, elephants, and crocodiles. Sounds produced by ocean waves, volcanoes, and earthquakes are also in this frequency range.
Maybe the elephants at the zoo were greeting us in voices we couldn't hear.
Maybe. Also, in the ultrasound range, above 18,000 hertz, insects, bats, dolphins, and shrews produce sounds. But language includes not just vocal communication. It includes much broader things, like affection, for example.
Like grooming.
Worrying about someone, caring. When we talk about the history of language, we humans unconsciously think of the history of human language. But if we consider the communication media used by organisms as language, then amphibians have their own history of language, and fish have their own history of language. This has become clear through recent bioacoustics research.
How can we unravel that history? It can't be excavated like writing.
Sound doesn't remain. Humans encode it digitally and inscribe it on stone tablets and such, reproducing and preserving sound based on that code. That became possible through the advancement of modern science and technology. Historians from this point forward can trace the history of sound, but they can't trace history before the invention of sound recording technology.
So it hasn't been researched?
Actually, humans are clever. From bone structure and such, we estimate muscle attachment and reveal what kinds of sounds could be vocalized. There's also a method of tracing biological evolution in reverse. Specifically, the history of human language might be unraveled through research on the language abilities of great apes.
What do you mean? That apes have evolved to use language?
Great apes are the animals closest to humans, a general term for apes with well-developed cerebral cortexes. It refers to gibbons and hominids, that is, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. When orangutans were taught sign language, they learned about 20 signs.
They can communicate.
When gorillas were taught sign language, they learned about 1,000 words. There was a female lowland gorilla named Coco who had over 500 active vocabulary words, meaning words she could use, not just understand, and 500 receptive vocabulary words, meaning words she understood but couldn't use. This is about the same as a human toddler. And it's not just a rich vocabulary, she also had high empathy. When she saw a horse with a bit in its mouth, she signed horse sad.
She understood feelings other than her own.
Right. When chimpanzees were taught sign language, they also acquired hundreds of vocabulary words. However, while they can communicate, they can't articulate words because they can't properly control their lips and tongue. That's because the laryngeal structure of great apes can't produce aspirated sounds like humans. They can only produce very simple vocalizations using the larynx, like boo-boo, ki-ki, hmm.
So it might have been a very long time from when humans started using language like sign language until they could vocalize.
This research on the language ability of gorillas and chimpanzees made clear that great apes do have language ability. However, it was unclear whether this was actually an ability to use language or whether it just showed that advanced training was possible, such as wanting rewards or performing tricks in response to nonverbal cues.
That's true. There are dogs that do tricks and parrots that talk and trained monkey performances too.
However, language research with the bonobo kanzi brought a breakthrough. To give you the conclusion first, great apes have the ability to use language. Not only that, but it was also shown that they have the ability to make stone tools, the ability to use fire and cook, and the ability to play games.
Wait, that's a lot of information.
That's what a breakthrough means. The bonobo kanzi was given an artificial language called lexigrams by Dr. Sue Savage Rumbaugh, a researcher of primate language in America. Lexigrams are a keyboard with symbols representing words or actions, and he uses this to converse.
I see.
What's interesting is that Dr. Sue draws out the bonobo's language ability using a Montessori-style approach. Kanzi manipulates hundreds of symbols and enjoys spontaneous creative communication with humans and other primates.
So Montessori education extends beyond humans.
Right. This is the story of Montessori education for primates. Kanzi's language ability wasn't acquired through operant conditioning like teaching tricks, so he's clearly using language through intrinsic motivation. In other words, it was proven that he uses language for communication just like humans.
That's thought-provoking.
Once Dr. Sue had her keys stolen by one of the chimpanzees at the research facility, she asked Kanzi, "Go get the keys back for me." Kanzi went to the culprit, muttered something quietly, and came back with the keys.
So he interpreted for her.
Right. Bonobos are famous for loving peace and are endangered great apes found only in the forests of the Congo. When you actually see them moving, it evokes indescribable emotions. I'd like everyone to search Bonobo Kanzi on YouTube.
I watched it too. The image of him walking on 2 feet while carrying things with both hands was impressive.
Personally, I think bonobos are positioned somewhere between apes and hominins before Australopithecus in our human ancestry. I think research on bonobo language ability is essentially research that traces back and reveals the history of human language.
I see. I hadn't thought of that approach.
So I want to mention 2 discoveries and insights gained from this. One is Dr. Sue's approach. What Dr. Sue did to get bonobos to use language naturally was to prepare an environment where the humans around them normally use language in daily life. She didn't use direct rewards or punishments to force language acquisition like a trick. She lived together with them and respected their spontaneity.
That's exactly the Montessori approach. Can adult bonobos do it too?
That didn't work. Dr. Su first tried to teach language to an adult female named Matada, but Matada showed no interest at all. However, her son, Kanzi, who was watching, started using language purely out of intellectual curiosity, so they decided to implement the education program with Kanzi.
So bonobos have something like a sensitive period for language, too.
Probably. Getting back to the point, the other insight is that the habit of combining many sets of symbols to express one's intentions and thoughts is essential for intellectual development.
What do you mean?
All great apes can't speak and converse because their skeletal structure doesn't allow pronunciation like humans. But if they have a set of symbols, like lexicograms, they can combine them to express complex concepts. That's the essence of the language activity that humans engage in. In other words, we communicate by combining not just sounds, but all symbols, such as gestures, facial expressions, and writing.
I see. When our 3-year-old second daughter watched the Kanzi video with us, she got hooked on combining words to express what she wanted to say, like night, not sleep, bad kid, or alone, sleep, good kid. And she seemed to be having fun.
Like room, mess up, sad. So language is made of combinations of simple symbols, and I think the experience of playing with combining them in daily life develops language ability. There are pattern differences derived from geography, culture, and customs, like Japanese, English, Chinese, and so on. But the essence lies in wanting to convey and wanting to understand. If you value just that, I think language ability will become refined.
As a human environment, it's important for the adults around to communicate using proper language. Adults deliberately handwriting text or writing letters can spark children's interest in written language.
Right. Unlike the Congo forest, civilized society has libraries and books are readily available anytime. By making use of that blessed environment, just as we evolved from great apes to humans, I'd like us to evolve from humans to the next species.
Right.
Reading and understanding scientific Montessori is also quite an advanced language activity. We'd be happy if you read it thoroughly and it helps with your daily child rearing. So with that, Today Talk finished.
Thank you for listening to the Scientific Montessori podcast. We hope today's episode helped you see how research and Montessori principles can make parenting simpler and more meaningful. For more articles and resources, visit scientificmontessori.com and join us again next time.